So tonight we have a marvelous group of Alejandra. We've got Immy, we've got Richard, we've got Sam, and yeah, we've got me. But there's got to be some downside. We're going to try and keep this really snappy and zippy. It's a hugely important subject, and of course we got right at the bottom. He's so sickly, I actually almost thought his life force had actually jerked off. It's Matthew Shribman, my good friend who leads Aim High. Sorry about that, Matthew. I didn't mean to imply you weren't on the call. I just thought you were looking pale. Now,
sorry if I looked shocked. There was a bit of a microphone issue with you for a moment, but it's gone away now. Anyway,
well, you can't hear me, or I'm too loud, or am I cackling up?
There was a moment of intense loudness, but it was quite exciting.
Right. Well, the point of this is post COP. Actually, it's not even definitely post COP. There's still negotiations in dark rooms. But the point of the conversation today is to see whether we can surface some themes that are shared by all of us, because actually secretly this is a kind of a straw poll for things that we would like to be concentrating on at Eden, and we want to ask some of the people that we most admire what they would do if they were us. So what can we get from your learning to make us better and better and better, and what can we do to help you? So I will start with a general question, and in no question of order, but because the lights are shining more fiercely off Richard's forehead than anybody else, we will start the show by asking, why on earth are we bothering to teach people about climate change and the environment right now? Surely it's boring. No one is obviously listening to it. The governments that be around the world don't seem to think it's important, and they seem to know better than us, don't they? So justify yourself, Mr. Dunne, as to why this is an important subject and we should actually put it right up at number one with a bullet.
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. I think two first reasons. One is that our young people really want to learn about climate change and their future. So that's really important. We need to listen to them. And a lot of them are telling us that it's really important that they understand it better. And in fact, a lot of them are even offering to help teachers to understand it better, which is a great partnership and dialogue that they're wanting to open up. So I think that's really important. I think alongside that, we must make sure it's not boring. And you're absolutely right. If education is boring, then any of us, let alone our younger people, will switch off from it. So we need to make it stimulating, relevant. I think if I were to add one final point, it would be that they play a lead role in resolving the problems, the issues in a very contextualized way in their schools, in their communities, and so on. So I think we need to give them ownership of it and help them to take a lead role.
Brilliant answer. And I'm going to move with, I heard the word community, and like a beagle, my nose tweaked, and I thought of my friend Immy. Immy, would you like to comment?
Yeah, so I think I really agree with Richard. You know, this sort of group probably doesn't need me to talk about the scientific reasons of why. But the dialogue, I think, is one of the most important things. What I feel is really missing in our societies, particularly having grown up in a largely non-Western background and child of immigrants, and seeing the kind of really problematic intergenerational separation that happens in our communities here in particularly England. I can't speak for the whole of the UK. I think the impact on that is far more severe than any of us imagine. The intergenerational breakdown between not only the generations and what it means to you know, be able to work in that way, but the longer term thinking around, you know, people like Roman Snarik and many indigenous populations from around the world talk about what it means to be a good ancestor. And so I think it's incredibly important that we step up to this real opportunity and dividend we have right now, where young people across the world and across the UK are stepping up and wanting to be heard, not only wanting to be heard, wanting to be actively involved and to learn more and to soak up what they might do. But crucially, there is a generation of us that can build that bridge and can start to manifest and show what really, really strong intergenerational action can look like, and can rebuild our cultures to be more akin to those that can understand things like 7th generation thinking and what it means to be a good ancestor. So I think that it's an incredible opportunity, not only to respond to crisis, but to rebuild the social contract and rebuild relationships and culture in a country where we've unfortunately created a lot of separation between us and the future and between generations. So I think it's an incredible, important and opportune moment.
Marvellous. Immy, thank you for a very thoughtful and thought-provoking answer. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the birthday lady of the day in Alejandra. Please, hello Alejandra from Force of Nature. Say your piece.
Thank you. And I feel like Immy gave such a wonderful answer. At Force, I'm from Force of Nature, by the way, I'm the communications director there. And at Force of Nature, we focus on mobilizing mindsets for climate action, and we really work with intergenerational solutions. Now, what exactly does that look like? It means working with people in power, both in businesses and politics, and also young people. And often what we find is that we're really responding to the crisis from the same space, the same emotional sort of level. In young people, we see it from a space of despair. And in older people, we normally see their emotions from a space of apathy. So what we have found that we truly, really need to respond to this crisis is how do we give people the tools to be able to take their emotions into agency, and really creating a space for reflection, both for young people, but also older generations. And we often find that when we give young people a seat at the table and we allow their emotions to rise up and to speak up, we often give space to older generations to being able to reflect on their feelings and their emotions as well. And there's a lot of power in being able to kind of rebuild those bridges together and being able to co-create those solutions. I think from an institutional level, often what we lack is seeing the power of imagination and the power that imagination can have in solving this climate crisis. And young people have vast amounts of imagination. So being able to be sort of inspired from that space, but first of all, moving from those barriers of the emotions that we're not really dealing with and then we're not letting ourselves feel.
Another super answer. And then down my picture thing to young Matthew, who's not feeling very well, but he's actually perking himself up for a stonking good answer. Matthew from the educational gang known as Aim High. Go.
Hi everyone. Hi. Yes, it's an interesting question, isn't it? That climate and nature education could ever possibly be boring, since it's so fundamental to our survival and also should be the basis of the way that we think about the world in many ways. You know, like we have always been limited by nature because we're very much a part of nature. And I think the journey of this nation, the UK, is that you know, we had a few points of ingenuity in which we invented a few small things that gave us this amazing marginal advantage, many of which we completely abused. But then this has kind of progressed into a great deal of folly. We've moved from industrialism through to an extreme disconnection from nature. And I think that same trend is completely woven through the education system. I completely agree with what Alejandra and Immy was saying about the importance of bringing together humanity and being intersectional in our approach, in terms of like bring different people to the table. But I also think that a lot more of the conversation needs to be about how do we bring the whole of nature to the table as well and get them involved and get my partner keeps talking about a crazy idea to create AI kind of representatives of loads of different species on Earth. And to begin with, I thought it was a crazy idea. And the more I think about it, the more I think it's actually a great idea. But anyway, no, I'm drifting away for a little bit from education here. So I'll go back towards that. But so there are a lot of things that we're now looking at as like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if we all learnt how to grow crops in a more diverse way? But actually these things were just fundamentally sewn into the education system of old, and it might not have been the traditional classroom education system that we're used to thinking about now, but it was just that this knowledge was being passed down from generation to generation. People knew about sowing different blends of clover and grass in order to make an incredibly healthy region of land and it was just fundamental knowledge that needed passing on. And Tim, one of the things you're always talking about is, isn't it crazy that we all go to school and we don't learn the absolute basics of how to feed ourselves, for example? Why is it that we don't start with these things that really link us with nature? We know that we have a very emotional connection with food. Why don't we use that as a way to connect people with nature through the education system? Anyway, I'm aware that I'm not as coherent as normal, so I'm going to kind of stop around now and just hand over to Tim or to Sam.
That's all right, mate. Hold on, you're doing really well. And now on to my good friend Sam, who's the boss of education at Eden. No pressure there after some super answers, eating up almost all the substance of what I could dream you might have said. So surprise us.
I'll try. I think I just wanted to build on what Richard said about the fact that this is something that children and young people are interested in and asking for, but also the sense of concern and dissatisfaction from parents. I think, we know that during lockdown, parents had what was for some quite a shocking insight into the depth and array of what's currently in the curriculum, and we seem to have found ourselves, particularly in the UK curriculum at the moment, in a rather strange backwards looking place where various ministers have tried to bring their 1950s private school education to bear on the children of 2020 and 2021. And I think it's time to stop looking to the past and start looking to the future. The same governments that are dragging their heels, many of them have made commitments to net zero carbon by various dates, as we know, and that future is rapidly heading for us. The children who are in primary school now are going to be entering the workplace as those net zero carbon targets start to hit. They need to be educated within an ecological model of education to prepare them for that new world, not a looking backwards over our shoulders industrial model of education.
What a marvelous segue that's going to be, because I'm going to come back to young Richard. Because what I'd very much like would be, Richard, could you riff on basically an idea which I know is shared, I think, by everybody on this panel from what's been answered so far, which is the move towards us understanding ecology and the systems which hold our life together, the cultural glue of all of that. And as many of the people watching will know, you are the champion for harmony and the harmony principles. And how they impact on students and empower them. Would you mind riffing on that for a while? Then we can broaden the conversation up from that. But I think I very much enjoy hearing you talking about this.
I would be delighted to, Tim. I think we've already heard in this conversation this need to reconnect to nature and see our place in nature. And I think when we look at our education system at the moment, for the majority of cases, it's still very siloed, as Sam said, really very backward looking, very disconnected, very classroom based. And it's not really connecting us to the world and the issues that we're facing. So I would really like to see a natural curriculum. I want us to move from a national curriculum, which feels a bit jingoistic and a bit old fashioned, to a natural curriculum that puts us within the context of nature. And of course, as you know so well from the Harmony work, to actually explore nature and what enables it to be so sustainable, because it's the best model of sustainability we could possibly learn from. So if nature is our teacher, what does it teach us? What are the principles and laws of nature? Its diversity, its cycles, its adaptation and evolution, its interdependence, and so on. What are these principles that can help us to really see the world in a different way? And if we understand these principles and we apply them through our projects of learning and then live them out in our practices, the day-to-day, ultimately sustainable practices that we develop, then we create a much better future. So I think we have to really, coming back to some of the points made already, I think we've really got to be ultimately quite radical in what we do. Now we've got to bring people with us, so we can't change things too quickly, but I think it's not as difficult as it may sound. I just think we need to reimagine. We've used this word imagination before. We need to reimagine how education can be with our place in nature at the heart of it, seeing that we are nature and that the way nature works, the way we work, is the solution to living in a healthy, sustainable way.
Marvelous. Well, if I could, that's that's really good, and I could see from the very, very energetic nodding of heads that you've got a political party behind you there. I think it's unanimous. So I'm not going to then put the same question to everybody else. I'd like to widen it slightly. We're going to come on later to how we might put in place policies which change our education system. But perhaps on the journey towards that question, we ought to be looking at a number of things. And as all of you know, my own personal vanity took me to accepting an invitation to join the Times Commission on Education. And I was hugely struck, firstly, by the generosity of spirit, kindness, and all the good things about the people who were on that panel. I was also struck by the sort of terror of breaking new ground, which saw or sees rather any change as, let's do this iteratively, let's make it slow, let's not shock the horses, which kind of supports some of the comments you were earlier making. I'm very interested, I'm going to come to you, Immy, and the context for an answer that I'm looking for is my experience of schooling through my sister who runs a school is that an awful lot of parents know that what we're doing is what is currently offered isn't right, but are terrified of being struck by lightning through, actually it's a bit like, you know, saying boo to your doctor, that if you don't give your children the schooling that everybody else says is appropriate, somehow you might be an irresponsible parent and you'll be punished and you will be bringing your vanity down on the heads of your children. You've got, probably amongst all of us, got more experience of working in a community and introducing new ideas, not only to a community, but across communities. Can you give us some brain food in terms of how you might approach softening the public up to accepting change before it comes, and also listening to them to see whether we can get some insights from them as to how they would like us to talk to them?
Yeah, absolutely, would be delighted to. So I guess in the middle of inner city Birmingham, I kind of find myself in a triangle of experiences. You know, I'm gonna move sort of private schools out of the conversation for a minute. But what I find myself in the state school system is three dynamics that we see. The one that is people know something's up, they know we need something different, but the ladder that everybody is on, the ladder peers are on, the grammar school system, the SATs, the system that means that if you are too radical with changing any of that, you suddenly are not quite sure that confidently enough the zeitgeist is going in that direction, and thus you end up worried about your children's future and what you're setting them up for. So what ends up happening is great people fall part of bad systems, or even people who maybe have the capacity and knowledge and space to say, let's do something different, kind of go against their gut. Then you have a whole scale of young people more closely to where I work that are in really precarious circumstances. So school is often the safest, most nurturing space for them, whether it comes to like the basics of early years, and education, to food, and so on and so on, right? So you have the first dynamic that I think is really important to notice is people on the whole that I experience day in, day out, know they want something radically different. And it is no lack of will or knowledge or connectivity or imagination, it's a systemic lock-in, right? And so some of the policy stuff I want to talk about later is about how we unbundle some of that. So we've got a lock-in on the one side. And then you've got a bunch of really exciting movements that I get to see. And this is really about what we value. So I'm going to use one that's nothing to do with nature first, just to give you a bit of an example. One of my old head teachers is pioneering a movement whereby many children who have multiple languages due to their background, often find that those languages that they can speak, write, do, etc. really well, Punjabi, Urdu, Hindi, etc., are never valued at the GCSE A level, level of skills, etc., and are often, busy badly trying to learn French or German to get a good mark. And he, in a city like Birmingham, he's pioneering a program about how our assets, our natural assets, the things that make our diverse cities really strong and bold, can be valued. And so what's interesting to me is that what is starting to be valued as important as that which people want their children and their communities to have more access to, such as our diversity, the strength of what it means to have a broader, more open-minded curriculum, and things like that. We're starting to see this real uprising from young people, particularly, whether it's schools being closed or children missing school on a Friday to protest, or so many different things that we're seeing. They're starting to rise up, and we've done a lot of work on, and I might show a picture or two later, to really bring ideas that are in the zeitgeist, such as Insulate Britain and Retrofit, or through XR, or through COP, and turn those into beautiful everyday experiences, educational experiences in the neighbourhood over half term, over the holidays. We actually stay open at the weekends in order to do that. So what I see and what I experience is really bold, strong movements of parents, of communities of all wealths, all backgrounds, deeply interested in not only resurfacing the things that make them who they are and bringing those out into the neighbourhood, celebrating our diversity, centering nature, being significantly concerned about climate action. And actually, there's no shortage of energy, imagination, excitement, engagement. There's no shortage, actually, across many of those wealth and social barriers and divides, of people questioning how adequate the current education system is. What I find over and over again is the systemic barriers, the lock-ins, the things that mean that actually it's incredibly difficult, whether it is your fear for the system, your fear for your children's futures, whether it's peer pressure, whether it's time poverty, whether it's resource poverty, whether it's lack of resources. These things are often what's holding us back. So I do think it's a mixture of both communities rising up and taking charge of that confidence. But I do also think later, when we'll talk about policy, there'll be some systems and other things that we really need to be starting to shift to enable much of this energy to be unlocked in more powerful ways.
Wow. Well, I'm now going to go down the screen to build on that. And Matthew, you are described as leading. It's a trendy word, and I would hate to label you with anything trendy at all, but you are considered sorry, that's not because you're not, but I mean, you're above that, is that you are considered by many to be, number one, a disruptor, a great respecter of science, but also somebody who feels that it is so joyous and so amazing that you've got to break through the barriers of STEM and all of that stuff and actually get people wherever they are excited in the ideas about how we all fit together. Would you like to give a languid but disruptive description of how you see the world and how you see the education system and that which you offer adapting to it?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'll try. So I think that we naturally as humans tend to think of things across simple kind of one dimensions. When we think about the climate crisis, people tend to think just about carbon, and they find it difficult to think of all the multiple dimensions of biology, and you see similar things in every different industry. Like in TV, they just care about viewership. They don't necessarily kind of look at who's viewing and where that might lead in the long term. And I think that in the same way in the education system, we tend to optimize for a really small number of things, and it gets us into a lot of trouble. And the longer this goes on for, the deeper set the systems that optimize along these one dimensions like grades become. And I think that we should think of these systems as biological systems that that will evolve and that need a certain element of disruption. That doesn't mean that they need to be completely torn down, but it means that some elements should be torn down almost at random to create some different ideas. And I think that the education system that we have, we've spent a lot of time trying to work directly with schools, and the more we do that, the more we just sense this feeling of such friction. It's so hard working directly with schools, whereas when you look at the stuff that's going on around the schools directly, a lot of it's really exciting. And so, you know, there are these I've forgotten the name of it, but like Scott Galloway's organization that he set up, what's it called? Section 4 is what it's called. It's like a kind of online university that I think they only specialize in branding and stuff like that. But ultimately, they've created a something which isn't there's no accreditation for it. They're not necessarily linked to an institution, but it doesn't matter, because really what could quite possibly happen over the coming years is that accreditation will really start to die out. Because what do people really care about? People really care that you actually have the skills that they need. I mean, if you're looking at someone's CV and you see a good university with a good degree on it, what do you actually take from that? Because what I take from that is this person knows how to work quite hard. And I don't really immediately think, oh, this person is going to be curious, or this person is going to have good ideas, because I don't think you can easily trust that the universities are necessarily teaching these things. And nowadays you look at the trends of who people are employing, and in the fastest moving industries, things like coding, where do people want to recruit Python coders from? They don't necessarily want to recruit them from universities that are teaching computer science. They want to recruit people who've done their own online courses, built up a good portfolio, and proven that they're actually really good at learning. And so in this sense, I know that this is a bit of a long rambling answer. Normally it would be a bit more concise, sorry. But ultimately, I think that the education system is ripe for changing a lot very, very quickly. And I think that it's not necessarily that everything will be torn down. A lot of things will stay the same. But I think that the more disruption that we can create around the edge of it to show how much better it could be, how much more it could be open to people and much more invitational, how it shouldn't be, this is one of the things that Tim is constantly inspiring me about, is that, you know, most of the great inventions didn't happen in kind of posh research labs or glass towers. They happened in people's sheds, because people were just playing around and tinkering with things. And I think that the more that we can help people to see that education is for everyone and it should be a broad church, the more that we will create a much better system. And to do that, I think we have to create something which kind of goes around or over the top of the education system. And our instinct to aim high is that it's really important for us to work with the people who really have audiences these days. So the big celebrities and sports people and so on, in order to create something that's kind of sailing close to media, but brings in all these educational ideas and is really, really thorough and rigorous and ensures a high quality of education to go with it. Was that
Thank you, Matthew.
Oh, great.
Brilliantly put. Sam, can I bring you in at that point? Because you work at Eden, which is an inspiring place. It's where you get a lot of schools and young people coming to learn. What's your perspective on what Matthew's been highlighting around, you know, how schools are responding to the challenges we face, and how we can help them by showing them examples of great practice and great learning? What's your sense of how willing they are to engage with that and to really move that forward beyond just the visit to Eden, back into their schools and into their practices?
Thanks, Richard. I think we have to be operating in the space of believing two contradictory things at the same time. I think, you know, absolutely we need those disruptive models, and we need to be finding brilliant stories of change and exemplars from outside the system. But we also, for me, and I'm deeply, you know, I'm a primary school teacher by training, I'm deeply embedded in the system. So for me, we have to find ways of working within the system as well. One of the reasons we have to do that is because that is where all of the children and young people are now, and we haven't got time. We haven't got time to do the revolution and wait until we've done that and redefined our terms for success and what we mean by success and invented the new system, it's going to be too late. So we have to work within the system as well. And so for Eden Project, one of the things that I think we can do is find ways of kind of sitting between those more disruptive and those more diverse models and the mainstream, and kind of finding ways to bring those two things together. That's absolutely the way that we've always worked within the programs that we run at Eden. And one of the things that we have recently been doing is working with Richard and the Harmony Project to develop these curriculum inquiries, which bring the Harmony Project's principles along with an Eden Project approach, but formulated in a way that is entirely accessible for schools operating within the current model. So I don't think there needs to be a contradiction between the current definition of success and this more ecological model. I picked off my bookshelf before I came down David Sobel's Place-Based Education, which is a marvelous read. I highly commend it. But in his kind of place-based project-based model, he talks about this kind of three-legged stool to get success. And one of those legs is academic achievement. The other is building social capital. And the third is developing the environmental quality of the local area, because for just as Immy was talking about, his stories all start from something that is deeply embedded in a local place. So I think we have to try and hold both those things at the same time, working within the mainstream as well as creating amazing models that fit outside the current paradigm.
Thank you, Sam. Tim, I'm happy to just conclude this round as you've just returned.
No. I do apologize. I'm going to be ripped off by the ambulance people in about 10 minutes with my sick stepmom. Would you mind chairing, and I'll just enjoy hearing your voices.
Absolutely. So thank you, Sam. I can completely agree. I mean, we have to work within the system that we have as it is at the moment, and the significant majority of our young people are within that system. And we have to inspire with other examples of what's possible. And the more we do that, the more hopefully people will understand that. Alejandra, your perspective from Force of Nature and working with education, how much engagement do you get? Are you finding it easy to work with the education system? Are people wanting to engage, or is that, coming back to the word friction that we heard earlier, are you sensing that too?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think I definitely understand from like Matthew's perspective, that sense of fear that's around, but I feel that kind of, well, anyways, my experience and perspective of where that fear and that sort of tension arises from is that as an educational system, you're often seen as like an emblem of society, of needing to know and having to know and having to provide the answers for culture and for people and for students. But oftentimes with the gravity of the issue, the climate crisis, we don't know. And I think it's hard for educational institutions to be able to be honest about that. So what we often see is that working with teachers, a place for being able to kind of enter into the conversation is speaking to them about how they feel about the climate crisis and how prepared they feel to teach children and other students about it. And oftentimes opening the dialogue from that very heart-centered space of sort of emotions allows for that conversation to broaden, and then to speak about the intersectionality of the issues and how we should kind of not silo education to just teach about the climate crisis from either a biological perspective or, geography, as is often the case, but being able to kind of speak about it from all these different angles. And as Matthew even shared earlier, you really bring nature into the conversation and see the intersectionality of how we can speak about these issues. But yeah, I mean, to kind of bring it back to the question, I think being able to give teachers and also students the tools on how to sort of deal with the inevitable feelings that arise. That's often like the that threshold to be able to kind of cross into those bigger conversations into how we can bring climate education further into schools.
Thank you, Alexandra. And let's just keep this conversation going, because what we're really talking about today is obviously so critical to where we go next. And these conversations and these perspectives will really hopefully inform the next chapters of the education story. So what do we need to do next? If you would like to see something happen that helps get this balance between understanding the demands that schools are and the pressures that they're under, and the measure system alongside the big challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and so on. And then from a very personal perspective, the student concerns that they have. We know a lot about mental health issues at the moment and so on. What would you like to see happen that helps to bring things together in some of the ways that you've already started to articulate? Immy, would you like to maybe give us some thoughts on that, on where you see things going next? Where do you like to see things go next?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that, I'm going to do my caveat of, I think that there is a whole system of shifts that are required, right? And they are interdependent, but I really do agree with Matthew. But I do think you have to start pulling off some plasters and starting to shift some of that. I think first and foremost, if we were talking some big policy moments, for me, one of them is a move towards a shift in the working week. That has to be met with a number of other interdependent things. So for those who are likely to take advantage of people, that is supported. But what I think that does is it does something really important, which is starts to build back some time. Most of what I have seen is time poverty at all scales, whether that's literal absolute poverty or even where there is financial wealth, we just have this time poverty. And what we know from those who were able to have a positive or a more positive experience during COVID, they were able to be out in nature much more. Why I think one of the things that I think is important about this is it means that we can start to think about the neighborhood as a site for learning. We can think of this as a collective challenge and a collective opportunity. Therefore, when you see the neighborhood as a site for learning, you see every building, every green space, every asset that exists in that place as a place for children, young people, intergenerational learning together. Second, connected to that, we need to be able to resource this idea that this is all of our problem. So if the neighborhood is a site for learning, everybody becomes part of the teaching and the learning of that co-relationship that Matthew talked about earlier on, where we're learning from, and Richard, you did, where young people are learning from older people are learning from younger people. We're hitting a multitude of challenges, from isolation to this lack of connection, with nature, to children sitting down in schools all day long when we have this incredible gift of the places all around us. And I think that what I'm interested in, and of course you could pick holes immediately in what I'm saying because it has to be met with a number of other things, but I think we need to give back space and time. We need to see the assets all around us, that we have everything we need within us and that nature has gifted us, and rebuilding our collective relationship to that is one of the key learnings that children and young people have. Having grown up in a largely intergenerational non-Western background, even just the ideas of intergenerational care, of growing up with your grandparents, of having older people around, of being able to learn and connect in those ways, to see everything around us as, from a faith perspective, to see God in everything around you, but to see nature and the future and challenge and opportunity in everything around you, means that we can start to rebuild some of that. Then I think, secondly to that, we have to revalue expertise and what teachers and educators can bring. I used to think it was a bit ridiculous when I used to hear when we were younger that in India, children would literally bow down at the feet of teachers, right? I still think that's a bit ridiculous. But my point is there was something about the value of the teacher and the role that teachers can bring. And I think that teachers have been so, just like many of our public services, have been so squashed and expected to do everything and be everything and fill every gap that austerity has built, that a lack of resourcing and funding has built, that it means that how on earth can we expect them to be able to focus on what is important when they are running around behind targets, worried about children not coming to school in the right shoes, in clothes that are warm enough, whether children have had showers or eaten. So I think when we start to, obviously this is a system challenge, but two things: let's acknowledge that we have everything around us. The neighbourhood can be a great site of learning. But secondly, if this is all of our challenge, then intergenerational relationships, assets at a neighbourhood level can be part of the opportunity and the challenge of learning. And secondly, let's really make sure that when we're understanding what that means, it doesn't mean doing away with teachers. It means actually investing in the knowledge, skill, wisdom, nobility that teachers and that expertise brings in society, and stop expecting them to be social workers for every problem that our broken economy and our lack of connectivity between our economy and our future challenges have brought. So these are some of the things I would like to see. And I kind of agree with Matthew that we've got to pull some plasters off in different places to get on with some of this. But also, one of my great colleagues, Indy Johar, told me a story many years ago, which talked about how BMW, forget the example and forget the company, but BMW really struggled apparently in-house to innovate on their electric car. All sorts of cultural and societal, social reasons why they couldn't. And so they had to build this like side company that just worked alongside, that had nothing to do with the main company. And then those two companies joined together eventually. So sometimes there is something really, really important about building the alternative, but not just getting lost in the system, showing what you mean, and then waiting for the moment where that can integrate in. And that's where I agree with Tim and Sam and others. The Eden Project has this, it has this incredible ability, doesn't it, to be doing its own thing and building its own thing, but incredible respect from people across all different spectrums, all different political backgrounds. And it has this way of bringing that is happening on the fringe into the mainstream. And so I'm interested in these ideas being able to play out together. Last point I just want to say is that when we talk about burning down systems, some things you just need to check out. It is just needs to be radically shifted quickly. But I still think that we should use the ideas that nature teaches of like composting, that is now waste. Let's take the best of it. Let's throw it in the compost and let it churn itself out and become something better. And there's something about that metaphor that I think really matters, because there's something really oppositional and something that stops people from even engaging when you say burn down the system. I don't know why this happens, but people are just associate with certain political views or certain ways of thinking. And so I'd love us to get richer metaphors for how we're talking about this stuff, so that very rarely is there nothing to learn from something we've done, and to really use that idea as composting when we're talking about hospicing old systems and rewiring all of that into something more positive. So I know there's a lot there, but I just wanted to kind of share some of the big thoughts, and hopefully you won't need to come back to me now.
Oh, well, thank you, Immy, so much. You're, as it says in the chat, fantastic points you've made. And so interesting. I mean, these are exactly the sort of conversations we need to be having about where we go next. I was really interested in what you said at the end there. Last weekend, I was with some food growers who were digging up turnips, topping and tailing them, and then shredding them, putting them in an urn to put in the ground with some salt to ferment them. And they said, in February, we'll dig up this urn and we'll eat this food, and it will be the best food for us in the middle of winter. It'll give us everything we need. And it was such a simple process. And you're absolutely right. As we think forward, we need to remember the really important things that our traditions, our cultures, our communities know. And I completely agree with you on this idea of, breaking down the walls and the barriers between what happens in school and what happens within our communities. And the expertise you highlight is so important, isn't it? Passing that on is what we need to be doing. So let's find ways to facilitate that. So thank you. I also love your comment on the values culture, something education needs lots of right now to be really, really valued. Brilliant response there. And let's bring in Alejandra, because I could see you nodding a lot there. And you were obviously resonating a lot with Immy, with what Immy was saying. What's your sense then? Where do we need to go next? What would you like to see happen next?
Thanks. No, I absolutely love the meta. I feel like the new metaphor should be compost the system. Really love that. And I think, thinking about education and really reframing the way that systems work for us. And maybe the question we can really start thinking about is, what and who do our educational systems serve? And if it's not nature, then what is it? Being able to then think about rebuilding these systems in order for them to be life-serving instead of life-draining. And in that way, I think that we can start to actually see the intersectionality of it. And I love everything that Immy has said around finding sort of the solutions to current global problems within the locality of our surroundings, because that's how we build community, and that's how we can bring in that intersectional and also intergenerational exchange to be able to kind of open up those conversations. I feel like most of the time, we often start to kind of function from the world from a very individual, siloed perspective, but actually being able to open up those pathways of communications between each other as human beings first, and then with our surroundings, with our communities and the whole locality around it. I just feel like that's really where we should start having those conversations. And often at Force of Nature, the way we start all of our workshops and whenever we speak to policymakers or business leaders, it's really starting from that feeling based. And I know I've been saying this a lot throughout today's panel, just asking each other how we feel about things in order to then create change from them. Because if we're not acknowledging how we feel or the emotions that are coming up, we're not going to be able to clearly see solutions that are right in front of us. And I think as young people, and often we really do see this in children, and in the way that they so easily express their emotions, express how they're feeling, and how a real sense of clarity and direction is found when we communicate that. So I'd love to start asking, our neighborhoods, our parents, our elders, how are we feeling? And also ourselves, how are we feeling about this particular system, this particular way of being or doing things? And if it's not aligned, if it's not serving life, then asking how can we change it so that we can feel more alive and more in tune with how we should be living.
I love that idea of serving life and in service of the life of humanity, of nature, of the world, is a great message. And doing it, as you say, intergenerationally in community, around inquiry, asking questions, really trying to understand where are we now and what's going to make things work better. So thank you, Alejandra. Matthew, you were clearly enjoying some of those comments there. What are your thoughts now on where we go next? We're running down on the clock now. We just got 7 minutes, and obviously want to bring in Sam as well. But what are you thinking in terms of, your challenge to creating something better, showing what's possible, but also, referencing some of the points made. We also have a system there that we've got to work with. What would you like to see happen from here?
Okay, a few things to reply to. I'll be as speedy as I can so that Sam has her time. So firstly, I saw a question from Aaron in the audience who was talking about the importance of adults being educated as well, and how otherwise there'll be a lot of friction if we're only educating young people and adults aren't coming along on the journey. And I think there are a few different elements to this. Firstly, at Aim High Earth, we're doing a lot of work with adults. So we're currently doing training for the UK House of Lords, and we're doing stuff. We've been working with our Olympians before they went to the Olympics, and finding these high impact groups that we can work with to try and change things quite quickly. But ultimately, I think you do need to work with young people and old people at the same time, because older people are obviously at the levers of society. But at the same time, it's younger people who often have a lot more time and a lot more interest and likeliness to kind of dedicate themselves to learning more. I don't know if anyone here has ever heard about I think it's called the Great Schlep, one of the most successful political campaigns in history, where the Democrats were trying to get more people to vote Democrat in Florida, I think it was. And they basically focused entirely on young people, entirely on teenagers, to teach them all about politics, to get them to then convince their parents and grandparents to vote Democrat. So there's a huge amount of good that can be done educating young people in terms of educating older people as well. But at the same time, one of the most fundamental things that needs to go alongside this is the support of communities. So this is why I was so interested in what Immy was saying, and because it's so vital. And also the Eden Project is obviously connected with the Morecambe Bay curriculum, which is a similar thing, which is an entirely community-based curriculum, which is another fantastic thing, which helps to connect people with a sense of place. And I think if you combine this with what a lot of the stuff that is done at Force of Nature with Alejandra and Clover, working on asking people actually how they feel and getting people to emotionally connect with one another, you can build community a lot more rapidly. And if education is a lot more centered on community, then the knowledge then percolates through the different layers of that community much more quickly. I think Aim High Earth as an organization, we really have to recognize that our weakness is that we do massive scale education reaching loads of people simultaneously, and we really lack the community element. And I think it's important for an organization like ours to constantly be thinking about that and constantly be thinking, how do we address this? And so that's why we're always keen to work with organizations that are good in the kind of community space. Anyway, right, really quickly, one last point, which is that the big thing that we think needs to change is that teachers should be superstars. It's already the case in places like South Korea, where teachers will fill whole stadiums and attract loads and loads of students to come and watch them and listen. We need to do the same over here. We need to get proper branding behind teachers, and that's basically a large part of the work that we're doing at Aim High Earth and a large part of the direction that we want to go in. Teaching should be considered one of the best possible professions that we can go into in a time of like multiple moral hazards of where we choose to work. There are very few things that no one can argue about whether it's morally good or not to be working in education. It definitely is. And so, yes, that's the main thing I was going to say. And then I was just going to really quickly reply to Anne saying about the importance of diversity. It's not just about imagination, it's also about appreciating diversity. And that's another thing that we need to do much better as a system, is consider the system, as I was saying before, as a kind of biological system where diversity is crucial in order for it to function. One of the things that I often say, more thinking about species in general, about the way that we think about the world, is that the thinking that only one species, our species, is the only species that should ever be considered in decision making is not going to work much longer in a world that depends on a great biodiversity of species to function. So we need that thinking in terms of species in general, but we also need it within our own species to learn to appreciate diversity again. Anyway, handing over to Sam. Sorry, that was longer than I intended it to be.
Absolutely, Matthew. Thank you. Diversity is central to the whole thing. If we get our diversity right, value it and its perspectives and its roles and so on.
Can I really quick? Sorry, I was supposed to say something about the idea that Immy was saying about Fridays and about having extra time. Sorry, I had that on copy paste. Ignore that. That was just a meme about 2050. But this one here is about giving people extra time to think about education on a Friday. That second link. Anyway, sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Matthew. Sam, final words from you.
Final words, which is really just to violently agree with all that has just gone before. But I think, we need to be really careful that we can't redefine our terms for success of what happens in schools without having some really brave conversations about what that means in society more broadly, and what we mean by a good life, because actually that kind of leads the education that's going to happen in schools. Absolutely, teachers need time and space and celebrating, and they need to be allowed to pay attention to their core business of education. Schools have done an awesome job of providing health and social work and community care and everything, and they have done it off the sides of their desks, and if they are going to be asked to do that, then they need to be able to be properly resourced for that.
What a great way to conclude our session, Sam. Thank you so much. We absolutely need to value our teachers and celebrate them, and we need more of these conversations. So thank you one and all so much for your contributions today. It's been a fascinating discussion, and it's been really wonderful to hear all your different perspectives. We probably could have gone on for another hour, but our time is up. So everyone, thanks so much for being with us.
And Richard, just to come in and thank you, my friend, for actually being unbelievable super sub in there on the chair at that front. We do have to close it immediately now. So big thanks to everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening. But thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.